Hi everyone, and welcome back to my channel, and thank you so much for tuning in once again into another one of my film stock reviews. And the film stock that I'm going to be telling you about today is the KODAK Pro Image 100, which is slowly making its way into my go-to film stocks. And I'm of course going to show you some sample pictures that I took on this film, and all of them were shot on my Minolta X700, and I have barely color corrected any of them, so this is pretty much what you're going to get, what you can expect when shooting this film. Now, the first time I shot this film stock was a few months ago. I've talked about it in one of my previous videos. It was on a vacation I took in the Maldives, and before making the review I just really wanted to shoot another roll of it, maybe try it in different conditions and shoot it in Paris where I live, just to see how it would handle a completely different environment before I could really formulate my opinion on it. So the KODAK Pro Image 100 is a 35mm film stock. It only comes in 35mm. It is not available in medium format yet. It appears that it has been at some point in the past, but this is definitely not on the market today. Who knows, maybe in the future. And it is a color negative film stock. Now, in the grand scheme, the grand timeline of film stocks, it is actually quite a recent film stock, especially when it comes to North America and Europe, where it was first released in 2018 and 2019. However, the film stock does date back a little further. It was first ever released in 1997. However, that was for the Asian and South American markets. It is kind of generally understood that this is a successor of the KODAK Gold 200 6th generation, and we still do have KODAK Gold, but the two film stocks have kind of like diverted into different paths. So in essence, it's supposed to be a improved and reworked formula of the 6th generation KODAK Gold. Now, what's interesting about the branding of this film is that it was kind of presented as a pro film stock, and it was supposed to be a cheaper alternative to the professional Kodak film stocks such as Portra, Ektar, etc. And whilst it is completely true that it is a cheaper alternative to the pro film stocks, it definitely does not break your bank like Portra would. Thinking that this film stock would perform like the pro film stocks would not be the most accurate expectation to have. Many film stock enthusiasts, myself included, would probably class this somewhere midway between pro and consumer films. So perhaps like half a level up from consumer films, but not entirely on the pro level. So like I said, about half of these photos were taken on my holiday in the Maldives, and then the rest were taken mostly last week in Paris. But I do have to stress that currently there is a massive heat wave in Paris. The weather is just super bright, super sunny, so it's probably not like completely opposing scenarios that I shot these two rolls in, but let's take a look at this regardless. Besides the suffocating heat, it has been a really beautiful week to be taking photos in Paris, because with the Olympic Games in full swing, there are so many people out, so many tourists. It's also the summer holidays, so there are so many activities for like kids and families, and Paris is really lively at this point. And so I got to take a ton of pictures of people just enjoying the sunshine and just hanging out outdoors. So the very first thing I wanted to talk about in regard to the Pro Image 100 are its colors. And it really does reproduce colors really well. It is a little less pastel than Portra, for example, and it's going to be more vibrant than the Kodak Ultra Max, perhaps a little less vibrant, a little less saturated than the Kodak Ektar 100. And the colors are very lifelike, very neutral and accurate. So this is definitely a film stock to look into if you want to capture reality. Now, the vibrant colors are accentuated even more when you have bright weather conditions and when you have good lighting. And when it comes to how it reacts to lighting, the difference is actually pretty big. I only took a couple pictures on an overcast day, pictures of my favorite subjects in the whole world, and there you can see that the colors are not just as vibrant as in the sunny pictures. Speaking of weather, however, it is interesting to note that this film is supposed to be specially developed for warm conditions and really well adapted to, heat and humidity. This is mainly because the first markets were, like I said, Asia and South America. And this for sure is something that is going to make this a perfect holiday film. So it should definitely not deteriorate in tropical conditions, and apparently you don't even have to store it in the fridge. Can't speak on that, I kept it in the fridge anyway, but I can confirm that the slightly extreme weather conditions in the Maldives, for example, or even in Paris in the last few days, definitely did not negatively impact the results I got. I didn't even know that before going to the Maldives. I just chose the film for its low ISO, but it for sure checks out. Also regarding the colors of the film stock, it does lean very slightly towards warm and yellow, and there is this yellow cast which mainly appears when you have less sunlight. So on more overcast days, the yellow cast or the yellow slight shift is going to be a little more noticeable, but it's something you can slightly avoid based on how you're scanning the film stock and also in post. That being said, the Pro Image 100 is going to be less warm than, warmer film stocks like Kodak Gold. It is a very slight warm bias that it has. The colors that this film stock really loves that are particularly vibrant are greens and golds, and I think you can really see that looking at these pictures. Now, when it comes to the film stock grain, it is marketed as a low grain film, and there is again this professional film inference that would make us think that the grain is very fine. It is definitely not a very grainy film, but it was definitely a bit more grainy than what I had expected. I shoot the Kodak Ultramax very often, and that one is a consumer grade film, and I feel like the grain is pretty comparable in the two. Maybe a little less in the Pro Image, but it is miles away from the almost inexistent grain in the Pro films like Kodak Ektar or Kodak Portra. Despite the grain being present, it still carries a lot of detail, even when zooming in quite far. So for example, look here, you can still literally read the letters on these posters. So I assume it could do quite well with larger prints, although I do think it probably does have its limits. This film stock also does really good with skin tones pretty much across the board. So I do believe that it could be a good choice for portraits. Where it, however, does have some limits is street photography, which I do quite often. It is not going to be my obvious choice for that, and that's not because of any other features of the film stock other than the low ISO. In good lighting and with still subjects, it still does quite good, but of course the slower speed is going to make it a bit trickier when it comes to moving subjects. Here, for example, I saw this group of people dancing, and although the light was very bright and the film did very well when it comes to most of the movement, I still did have a lot of photos with the motion blur, like for example this guy who was dancing a bit more vigorously than the others around him. But again, this is to be expected with a 100 ISO film. I still did find that the pictures were quite sharp, not as sharp as the ones you could probably capture with the actual pro grade films, but for what it is, it did do quite well. The Pro Image 100 also does very well with shadows, which probably it does better than other consumer grade films. And that's both when it comes to colors, so the dark shades tend to be very deep, and there is grain in shadows, but not that much more than in highlights, so that's pretty good too. I didn't find a lot of color noise either, and the film has a very lovely contrast. Again, less so than the Ektar, for example, however still a very decent contrast. Another great thing about this film stock is that it is pretty forgiving. I found that barely any of my photos were outright ruined. It is easy to use providing you have at least decent light conditions, and I think this is in part due to the dynamic range of the film, so it's going to do pretty good with a mix of highlights and shadows within one frame. I didn't have any blown out highlights, any muddy shadows, so yeah, pretty easy to use, pretty beginner friendly. Now, although the film has a good exposure latitude, the way you expose it is definitely going to affect your results. It is usually recommended to overexpose your color negative films ever so slightly. However, interestingly, in this particular case, when you overexpose the Pro Image, the colors do lose a lot of vibrancy. So maybe with this one, a good rule of thumb is going to be the box speed. You could maybe underexpose it a little. Overexposing will come at the cost of losing some saturation. So yes, I think I touched on almost everything. The grain is very fine, although not as fine as you would expect from a professional film. The film is very low maintenance and very stable in hot and humid conditions. The colors are bright, saturated, whilst also remaining lifelike and quite natural. And very importantly, it is a very good value for the price. It does somewhat come to bridge the gap between consumer and pro. I would still, in my opinion, class it as more of a consumer film, but it does have a very good quality and you're getting more than enough of what you pay for. I really appreciated the ease of use. I think anyone, beginner or pro, can really use it and get the most out of it. And I'm definitely adding it to my list of go-to film stocks for bright, sunny conditions. As always, do let me know in the comments if you've shot it before, if you've enjoyed it, or what your favorite alternatives are in the 100 ISO category. I'm always really excited to hear back from you, and I'm looking forward to seeing all of you very soon in the next video. In the meantime, take care of yourselves, take some beautiful pictures, and bye-bye.